Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Happy Friday. Welcome back to our watch series for ŌNCE Club Weekly. Today we are with the ever enigmatic Alys McMahon from Private Label London. She's presenting the Verses episode today. Hi, Alys. How are you?
Hello, I'm good. I'm so much happier when the sun is out, which we've had a blast of this September.
It actually has been quite a delightful September. So I hope everyone is enjoying it and enjoying the sun while it lasts, because
Get it while it's hot.
Exactly. So today, the Verses episode, do you want to tell us a little bit about what we'll be doing, what we're going through today?
Absolutely. So hi everyone. We thought it'd be really cool to just kind of do, not dwell too much on some of the choices, but particularly as we go through here, you'll find that there are questions that you'll be asked from clients where they say, which one is better, or what should I go for? So these are by no means an exhaustive list, but certainly some of the most kind of frequent questions that I've been asked and still do get asked, just based on a this or a that, a versus, which one's better. We'll go through them. We won't kind of go into too much detail about them. This session is really just designed just to be kind of almost quick fire, but with a little bit of kind of explanation, so that if you are asked either any of these from your clients, you can kind of give an assertive opinion on it. As I say, then they're absolutely not exhaustive. If you have additional this or that kind of throughout, even seeing this session, and kind of think about anything either within it or after, definitely get in touch if you kind of want an opinion on a which one. So we'll go through some of them today and explain a little bit about the background of those questions. Cool. Should we start, Dom?
Let's go. I'm excited.
Cool. I am as well, actually. I definitely wanted to oh, hang on a sec. Here we go. Okay, so we'll cover key brand styles, versus on sizes, and then just overall, I guess it's just comparable choices. So just keep in mind.
I'm excited to learn about the sizes, actually, because I was recently looking at watches. I'm not gonna lie, they were not AP, but we were looking at watches, and funny enough, looking at sizing is actually quite key. I quite like a generous space. A generous dial, if you will, but then depending on the watch and the watch strap, I noticed that you can sort of go up, down, depending. So yeah, that would be really cool to
definitely. And I'll give you a little bit of context into kind of the different kind of types of market who are buying into different sizes as well. Okay, so first up we have the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak versus the Patek Philippe Nautilus. So this is probably the most anticipated question you'll get. Both styles.
And these are like the two that come up all the time. Like in terms of like
constantly.
Style, they seem to be the two that always come up the most. And then of course you've actually put the day date and the date just for the Rolex as well. So those are the
absolutely
things most of,
yeah, absolutely. So just a fun fact on the Royal Oak and the Nautilus, it was actually designed by the same person.
No.
So fun fact.
Oh,
so a guy called Gerald Genter. So it's a really interesting story. But they were designed fairly close to each other as well. I think it was the Nautilus that was designed on a table napkin. He literally just kind of drew it out. But there is a reason why people like both of them. They're quite a sort of a utilitarian style, super simple. And very basic, but just sharp. So a really kind of a nice. Both of them are very effortless. They come in both female sizes as well as male sizes for obviously anyone who's kind of questioning. But typically, as I say, that's probably the most requested kind of opinion from clients that I get. So just moving on then, the smaller size versus the larger size. So again, Dom, to your point, there is such a there's such a movement, I guess, in kind of sizing, especially over the last year. So we've seen a very big increase in female clients wanting a larger face, larger diameter. Dominic, to your point, you've said that you're also kind of into that kind of look.
Just don't like a dainty watch. Like, I don't know why. I think there's a massive focus on this idea that because it's a female watch, it's quite dainty, and I find sometimes the sizing is quite limited in options when it comes to sizing for female watches. So I actually end up looking at male watches with smaller dials.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and actually, look, a larger size could be anything from a 40 mil. So some of the popular Rolex styles, and then the Royal Oak, actually, just to touch on that, that's the larger size of that is a 41. It also does go up into a kind of a 42, 43, depending on the complication. But smaller sizes are definitely something that are a lot more popular now in the APAC region. So when I say a smaller size, I'm talking about specifically a 31 mil Rolex Datejust, for example. 31 mils do exist in other Rolex styles as well, but we've seen quite a big increase into the 31 being quite popular, which a year ago, again, everyone was leaning more into kind of a larger face, but actually there is something around the 31 mil, which is actually quite a neat, almost barely there style, specifically for a female anyway. And then the larger sizes, as I say, are probably from kind of 40 mil onwards. If you're looking at a kind of a mid-range piece, you're looking at probably a 36 or a 37 mil. Again, also very popular. The 36 mil Rolex Datejust was designed initially for a man back in the 70s and 80s. So, and in recent years, it's become much more kind of widely worn by a female client base as well. But now the much kind of more bought into size is typically a 40 mil and above for both female and males. So then moving on to the Rolex Day Date versus the Datejust. So this for me is more of a personal preference. So the Day Date has got a lot more, I would say, prestige about the piece. It's also known as the President's Watch. It was designed in 1956. And then I think it was worn by President, was it Robert Lyndon? Something Lyndon. Anyway, worn by him in 1965 and then became known as the presidential watch. So all of the marketing that you see around this piece from Rolex is largely centered around that. The Datejust is, say that again.
Lyndon or Nixon?
Lyndon.
So we might have to come back with some history facts.
Yes, yeah, definitely. And then the Datejust is essentially just the date that's displayed on the watch on the watch face. But the Day Date itself gives the day at the top. So you'll see like a little kind of panel at the top. Pictures would have been really useful here, I'm realizing now. But there's only one. So yeah, it has the day at the top. So it's actually a really neat piece to wear, and it also has it's called the presidential bracelet, which is a slightly wider set bracelet strap that kind of is essentially just continues the whole way around the wrist. The Datejust has what's called a deployment buckle, which is typically like a kind of a panel that clips off and then can be maneuvered to fasten. Mm-hmm. The next one is a very good one. We've touched on this in previous sessions before in terms of what different markets buy into, but steel versus platinum, gold, and white gold. So steel across the board, especially in the secondary market, is the most popular metal that's purchased, or material, I should say. Platinum, gold, and white gold tend to be much heavier in terms of their actual physical weight of a piece. So you can generally tell if something just looks silver. You can generally tell if it's either white gold or platinum, but platinum's a lot heavier than white gold. But in any case, there's a big weight difference in terms of steel versus these. Typically, Middle Eastern clients, specifically males, wouldn't necessarily ever buy into gold or white gold for religious reasons. So they wouldn't wear gold at all. Females would be able to wear gold, but what I would say is it's the steel that far outweighs. It's just the most popular metal of all of all of them. It's lighter. They're designed in typically all of the sports models. And so this is why still to this day, even though it can sometimes command a bigger price on the reseller market than a platinum gold or white gold piece, it still just maintains its popularity.
It's quite interesting actually, because I suppose you would assume that the gold would be taking up more would have a higher price point.
Yeah.
But like you said, and I suppose steel is more hard wearing.
Yep.
As well, which obviously makes it, I suppose, if you want to talk about investments or what have you, I suppose that's why it's more attractive.
Yeah, absolutely. And then moving on to complication versus simplicity. So as kind of mentioned previously, if you have a more complicated watch, you typically have more functions. So a day date, for example, has more of another complication versus the date just, because it has the little day wheel as well as the date wheel. So just that's kind of to put it really simply. One thing to keep in mind with a complicated piece is that it typically has a higher set profile. So when you actually look at a piece on the wrist, it tends to be slightly higher. And that's generally because it has extra movements in it. Of course, it physically has to be slightly thicker. And this is really something that if a client, for example, is thinking about, if you take the AP Royal Oak, for example, it comes in just the Royal Oak, which is obviously the flattest. And it also comes in an offshore as well, which then has kind of different chronographs on the face. That actually sits, as the offshore sits quite high on the wrist. So I often have many conversations with female clients where they'll say, I really love the offshore, but I don't like it to sit. I don't want it to be particularly thick on my wrist. So then, you have to kind of go down the route of just trying to figure out, what is it in the watch that the client actually wants? Is it the chronograph, or is it, if it's the chronograph, then of course you will have a higher set profile of a watch. But otherwise, the simplicity side of it would generally mean less movement, less complications, and it will sit slightly lower on the wrist. So it's a look and a function feel. Some people will want to buy into a watch for just the look of it. Other people will actually, the offshore, for example, is a diver's watch. So if you are diving, then it doesn't matter necessarily about how thick the profile is, because it's not used in the same visual kind of fashion referencey way than you might expect.
Yeah, I was going to say, I would love to know how many of these clients are actually using all of these on the watch, because I tell you, sometimes I'm looking at the watches and I'm like, I don't know what that means, but I like it.
You know what, it's so funny, and it also it taps into like a childish kind of fascination I used to have with it. Like, you see a button, you want to press it, so like the more buttons you just press, you just keep pressing.
I don't know what it does, but half the time you don't even.
It's so true. I had a client recently who bought the GMT Master 2, which typically gives you up to three different time zones. But actually, the client never traveled. They're in the UK. They didn't need it, but they wanted it. So when I kind of had to give a bit of a demo on how to use it, they were like, okay, this is great, but I don't travel anywhere. So I just said, just pick 2 other time zones and just live your life through them.
Maybe it'll make you want to travel. There you go.
Exactly. The next one we'll move on to is brand new versus vintage. So we've had this talk before. Interestingly enough, Rolex specifically have had some supply and production issues in the recent year. So they're largely down to the pandemic and supplies and steel and kind of component parts. But actually, it's much harder now to get Rolex, to get a brand new piece from Rolex. And they've openly actually issued a statement, which if anyone kind of wants to have a read, there's actually a really cool statement, a really cool article, on Hypebeast, which actually covers the fact that Rolex have made a statement, which in and of itself is quite unusual. But to then go on to say that actually their supply over the last year has kind of really dwindled, meaning their production is quite slow, means that there become fewer on the market, which then in turn will drive the secondary market price up. And
it's quite unusual, because it really must be a problem if they're making a statement about it.
Absolutely. This is the thing. So not only, Rolex are they're owned by a trust, so actually they're not necessarily trying to run, they're not making a huge amount of money as a business in terms of their own growth. They don't need to be any bigger, but they put a lot more money back into kind of charitable kind of operations and things. So for them to kind of comment is quite a statement in the market, in the industry, I should say. And then the same just to be said for kind of Patek is that they have the same as Rolex, they have artisans putting these watches together. And Patek have always said that if they could increase their production, like if they doubled their production, it would take them at least 20 years to get to a point when they had enough artisans trained and completely reliable for pieces. So, of course, with all that kind of messaging, whether that's true or not, I mean, you have to take these things with a certain pinch of salt, but it does drive the price of the secondary market up. But that being said, the brand new versus vintage does mean that you can still get them through the secondary market, of course. So and then vintage, I mean, vintage for me, again, it goes down to whether it's a head or a heart purchase. I've spoken about this many times, but with vintage, there's a lot of styles that are produced by Rolex specifically that you can get hold of now, that have a really cool kind of just patina to them. So the dials have worn really well, or the metal has been really scratched, and actually there is kind of a growing demand for that as well. So again, that's a complete personal choice. There are some incredible vintage models around, both in Patek and Rolex, both of which from both of those brands are not produced now as any part or as part of any collection. They may well lean into it, but for now they remain kind of firmly in their place as vintage, kind of almost archive pieces. The last one, which I think is quite important, is custom versus factory. So again, we've talked about this before. I think when you're having conversations with clients, and a client says, what's better, should I buy a custom or factory? I think it depends where they are in their watch collection journey. So I always say that, I don't know how usual it is for a client to say, right, I don't have a watch. My first watch, I'm going to have a custom piece. I think it's more likely just knowing the world of watches. I think it's much more probable that a client will come to you first and say, I'm coming of age, I've graduated, whatever it might be. I really want to buy my first Rolex or AP or Patek or whatever. And I think that they'll more likely than not, they'll want a factory piece with you. So they'll say, what piece, what's the first kind of investment piece that I should go for? I think custom then comes in a little bit later on down the line, where a client says, okay, it doesn't matter what price point they're spending, by the way. They're not kind of exclusive to certain levels of client or spend. But a client may well turn around and say, well, actually, I bought this, Rolex date just, 10 years ago. I want something different now. Can I update the dial on it? Or can I change the bezel? Or can I, put something on it that makes it unique? And there is that growing market where clients have actually built a very cool established collection of, kind of 3+ pieces. And now they're turning around and now saying that they want something a bit more unique. So again, it's personal. I would say that just experience tells me that if a client is buying their first watch with you, it will be factory, and then the custom part kind of comes after that. So that
sorry.
No, I was going to say that actually covers kind of everything. It covers the most parts of what you guys will probably be asked. Mm-hmm. I can definitely share some images of kind of some of these comparables, just for you to see, so that if you want to start having these conversations with clients, then you've got some information.
Yeah, I think that would be really helpful. I think when we're talking about clients, or when we're talking to clients about the watch market and kind of how these watches are acquired, I think it's really important. And actually, I wonder if we can just quickly discuss. We recently had a couple of members ask about getting access to a couple of styles. I think it was 3 styles this week, and it's I was actually quite surprised because they were sort of looking for new
Mm-hmm.
this year, and my first initial thought was, and I couldn't know this at all, was that I wonder if the client has a relationship, or I wonder what their relationship is with these brands. I think they were both APs. They were all the stars.
Yep.
APs.
Yep.
I wonder if what their awareness is of AP, because I think that actually it's an interesting situation to kind of be like, hey, I want this watch, and actually having to go through the process of knowing that, okay, well, before we even sort of talk about pricing, etc., you know, this is what you have to know.
Yep.
You know, in terms of before we kind of so they understand where you're coming from when you get like a price, and why this price is different to the price that they might have seen, I don't know, in a magazine or a brochure or in a retail store.
Yeah, I think there are some really it's about coming from a place of authority. So when you have these inquiries that come in, asking questions, we touched on it on a couple of the other episodes ago, but asking a client questions on things. So is this your first watch, or, you know, have you purchased an AP in this case before, or you know, in some cases you'll know this because a client may have already purchased something with you, so obviously part of those questions have been answered. But absolutely, as a first-time client, you know, definitely understanding where they are in their collection is a great starting point, because you know, there are many clients that have come into me over the years who have not known that there's a secondary market, and, you know, you may just quote a price very quickly, and they say, oh, that's a lot more than I wanted to spend. You know, I had kind of, you know, 10,000 in my head, or whatever the retail price of a piece is. So I guess, you know, that can help you to lean into the secondary market conversation, and just understanding that there is an instant access with that price, versus trying to access directly from a boutique. But in some cases, I mean, they're also just because you're a boutique buyer, doesn't always mean that you'll get the piece. So as an example, there are a lot of kind of male clients that I've had over the years who are very well known in Patek, but they're unable to get a specific Patek piece. You know, they feel like they've bought everything that they can buy, but they still don't have this one kind of pivotal piece that they want in their collection. So,
and that's,
you know,
and that's a sense of, and would that be down to a sense of how can I put it, the boutiques making that final call in terms of if they're going to allow you to have that access?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And in some cases, it's you know, in the case of Patek, I mean, there's one specific scenario I was thinking of when I said this, is that the client wanted, I think it was the 5171p, I think it was, basically had this enamel work on the dial, and the reason Patek couldn't give it to them was because the artisan that did the enamel painting was going blind, and they were unable to replace this person kind of as quickly as they'd kind of taken the order. So it was literally a wild story. But the client kind of ended up coming to me and just saying, right, okay, I've got some pieces with you. I really wanted to get this through the Patek boutique, but in actual fact, now I can't get a brand new one. I want one that's been, you know, unworn, and, you know, is still new, hasn't been worn, but I still want this piece. I still love it. So there are many reasons why, but in that case, it was actually, you know, kind of physically being unable to produce the item.
Isn't that
yeah, it was wild, really, really wild. So
in terms of like, you know, just because we are talking about verses, you know, and just so our viewers can sort of have an idea, what is, let's say if we're saying and I know you have done this in the past with some of your earlier some of the early episodes, if we're looking at an Audemars Piguet Royal Oak boutique, or, you know, retail versus secondary, what type of price points are we looking at? And I know it's obviously swings and roundabouts with styles, but let's say we're talking about something that's quite accessible or popular in a boutique, and the same maybe we can do with a Patek Philippe, just so that there's a sense of, you know, knowledge with retail versus secondary.
So for the AP Royal Oak, say let's take a 41 mil, the most popular style, the steel with the black dial. You're looking at around £18,000 at retail.
Okay.
You're looking at probably closer to 24, 25 now at resale. So not a huge increase, but still substantial, especially given that it almost seems silly to have such a small increase in that way. Because the response when you usually give this comparison is, well, why can't I just get it at retail then? But again, it's the supply and demand question. For a Patek Philippe Nautilus, let's take I'm going to give you two examples. We've spoken about this before. The 5711, the blue dial, for example, you're looking at probably 16 to 18,000 at retail, and you're looking at about 103,000 at resale.
Whoa,
like it's wild. If we then knock it up, turn it up a notch, the latest olive dial retails for about the same. I think it's closer to 20 actually. The olive dial 5711, so the same as the blue dial I just mentioned. The resale value on that I think is close to 350,000 now. So it's, I mean, this is when, it has to level out somewhere, and it has to come down. I mean, it's the amount of clients that I've just said, just don't do it. Just don't do it. We've actually sold a couple at those wild prices. But just in the last, what month are we now? Nearly October. In the last 2 months alone, the price went from 250,000 at retail. Sorry, not a retail, a reseller, and then has kind of jumped up again, another 50-60k. So it's I mean, it has to flatline at some point. But I guess what happens when people like Rolex release the news that they have, or Patek kind of release news on the back of Rolex releasing news about production pieces and production being slow, is it absolutely gives kind of these kind of secondary market dealers the authority to go, right, okay, well, Patek and Rolex have just said that there's a struggle producing, so let's hike the price up. And it really is that kind of dictatorial in the market. So there's rationale behind it. I think the AP Royal Oak, for example, doesn't fit, like it's not an unreasonable kind of increase. But the Patek Nautilus, the olive dial, definitely just, I would say, hold out a little bit, unless you're like a super fan and you just must have this piece. But then the blue dial of the same Patek Nautilus is probably one of the most, if not the most, demanded watch globally, and has been for the last 5 years.
Wow.
So it's quite wild. I think in one of my earlier episodes actually, we were able to get a piece at retail many years ago of the 5711 blue dial, which was like I think it was like 16 or 17,000 at the time. Now, had you kind of kept it and kind of held on to, and that was on behalf of a client, so there actually wasn't a resale added, it was just a fee for being able to source the item. But that client now, I'm sure, could kind of quadruple or take 10 times back the money on selling that again if they wanted to.
And it wouldn't matter that if they had used the watch on, or it would depend on condition, or
I mean, most watches, most people buying these watches, that they are looking after them. So depends on, it's an interesting question actually that I will cover, which is a lot of clients will ask, can I get a piece that's pre-owned or kind of slightly older, and does that reduce the price? In most cases, it actually doesn't. It has less than a £10,000 bearing on the price overall, I would say. So but that being said, this is also why we spoke about this in an earlier episode. This is also why vintage is becoming a lot more popular now, because there is a there is a kind of a level out on vintage pricing. So depending on your tastes and kind of your price sensitivity, or what you're willing to spend, you can actually get a really cool vintage piece, be it Patek, AP, or Rolex, for a fraction of the cost. So there is, that's an ever-growing market if somebody came to you and wanted to buy a first watch.
Awesome. That's amazing. It's so interesting, all the things you kind of have to take into consideration. I mean, it's much easier buying a dress for sure.
Definitely. Not if it doesn't fit though.
Well, true.
You've got a little bit more movement with a watch, being able to, you know, have links taken in or taken out, put back
True,
in.
true, true.
So, you know.
So crazy. It's very interesting, and I think it's great. I think these are all really great points to talk about with your clients. So thank you so much.
Yep. You're welcome. Very welcome.
So where can we find you if our members need your support or inquiries?
So if you can go through the ONCE Club, I'm also happy to jump into a WhatsApp chat or a group, I should say. So, you know, sometimes that works better for everyone, really, just from a speed perspective. But for sure, yeah, absolutely fine. You can find me via the ONCE platform and DM me that way, or you can also WhatsApp me as well.
Amazing. Well, Alys, this is always I love to know more about watches and the market. So this has been fantastic, and I'm sure a lot of our members will find it really useful going forward. So thank you so much. Thank you for spending your time with us.
You're welcome. Very welcome.
We will see you soon. We have one more episode coming before we take a little hiatus for new season next year. So we'll see you soon.
Definitely. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye.
Everyone, bye.